The views and opinions of this program are those of the hosts, guests, and callers. There is substantial risk of loss in trading futures and options, which you should carefully consider prior to trading.
Well, as we near the end of the month of August, Farm Progress Show week. In fact, I'm already in the Ames-Boone area here for the show this week, and I can feel the corn sweat outside even early on Monday. And it's just it's shaping up to be a quite a weather week with heat and severe storm risk and much more. Let's talk about it. Joining us now, Eric Snodgrass with Nutrien Ag Solutions. Eric, it's like you, of course, are in the comfort of your air conditioning there in central Illinois. But man, oh man, it's shaping up to be a hot one here, at least to start the week across the Midwest.
You know, what's interesting, Jesse, is I heard from a lot of folks about how much they love this little heat wave coming through and they need the heat. They want to get the crop pushed to the very end. And so the heat that's on right now, yeah, I mean, we're expecting in Nebraska, maybe a little bit of Kansas, but certainly Missouri, getting into Iowa. Temperatures in that little kind of corner of the Midwest are likely going to be going over 100 degrees today before you factor in the heat index. And remember, the USGS released a study a number of years ago that found that on average, at this point in the year, an acre of corn will evaporate somewhere north of 4,000 gallons of water a day into the lower atmosphere. So, yeah, it's pretty gross. But, man, I got to ask you something. Since you're already there, I'm heading to Des Moines tonight. What'd you think about the Pro Farmer numbers? We haven't talked about it since they came out. I'm just curious your opinion on some of that from last week.
I traveled quite a bit of the Midwest the last couple of days, and I even got up into Wisconsin, for instance, over the weekend and drove through parts of Missouri. I think it's a case of the good areas are good and the bad areas are bad. But we've been mentioning this all year long. I think the good's going to outweigh the bad, depending on how this crop finishes. I think that's the big caveat here, Eric. I mean, do I think the numbers are completely in line? I'm still maybe a little skeptical on just where this crop finishes up. I think there's so many bad areas that we're going to have zeros. I think that's going to be a big key. But it seemed to be that, their tour found kind of that same adage. The good areas are good. The bad areas are what they are. Is that kind of how you took it, Eric?
I did too. I thought it was an interesting report. I love that they do it. I think it's an extremely valuable thing that gets published. I think the biggest surprise for me was Ohio. And the Ohio River Valley has been very dry in pockets as of late. Although my uncle's here from parts of Ohio, and he says, man, my grass is green as can be. But you get down near the river, soil moisture values are pretty low right now. And over the next 10 days or so, it's the Mid-South into the Ohio River Valley that I think has the best chance at staying drier. So while where you are and then north of you into parts of the upper Midwest, the Northwest Corn Belt is expecting a lot of severe weather today. I mean, there's a huge area that stretches from Nebraska, South Dakota, through parts of northern Iowa, a little bit in northern Illinois, but Wisconsin, Minnesota, bullseye probably in Minnesota for severe storms. They're all running the periphery of this ridge that's going to stay hot in the Ohio Valley all the way through nearly the end of the week before a big cool down comes through. So I'm curious as to how the Mid-South is going to shape up at the end of this season, given that that's still a drier area and that extends farther to the east over toward Ohio. And as you said, I want to know what these holes look like in the Western Corn Belt, because I've flown over them, I've seen them, I've driven through them, and but Pro Farmer Tour, these folks know what they're doing, and I appreciate what they do. So it'd be interesting just to see how it all shakes down as harvest rolls around. So yeah, that's my opinion.
I would agree with you there. And real quick, too, with all this heat that's coming through here these couple of days, are we worried that might take the top off some yields? I mean, what do you think about this heat coming through, Eric?
Yeah, most growers I talk to are not. I mean, it's just late enough that it's actually going to give the last push of GDDs. Most of that area isn't high enough in stress degree days yet, so it can take that stress and be fine. So I look at all of it and I go, all right, I actually think it's going to be a benefit to push the crop. And my neighbor down the road here goes, my biggest problem is everything's still green in the field. He goes, I need it to start turning and drying down. He goes, this heat's fantastic. He goes, when's it going to get cold again? And I'm like, by the end of the week, it's going to, not cold, but cool back off. He doesn't want that. He wants heat for a while.
I want to talk about the cool down in a second, but you mentioned the severe weather risk here early in the week across the upper Midwest. Is it all hazards that we're looking at here, Eric?
I think it's mostly a wind and hail event. It's not the right wind shear profile to give us a lot of rotating storms. I think it's going to get real messy, big complexes of storms rolling through, which locally are going to produce some very, very heavy rain. But I'd be more concerned about the wind and hail threat. We've seen that over the weekend. Most of the storms over the weekend were big hailers and winds. So I don't like that. This is not the right time of year to be getting that kind of severe weather. And by the way, I mean, we're still, not to completely switch this on you, but before we talk about temps, don't forget, we still have to watch the tropics. And tropics have been quiet in August, but that area I mentioned in the Delta and the Ohio River Valley, we could get ourselves into a situation where once we get into the beginning of September, there could very easily be a system in the Gulf that comes up and dumps a bunch of rain on that area, which honestly, I don't know that they're going to want in late September or even mid-September. So, man, it's still, there's a lot of moving things here, Jesse, and yeah. And frost is probably the next thing on your mind.
I was just going to say, yeah, you led me right there. I mean, with many areas, especially if things got planted later. I know there was a lot of areas that saw some late planting and still plenty of green out there in the fields. I did see plenty of green as I was driving through the Midwest here the last few days. So with that in mind, what is the prospect? Are we concerned about an early frost? I mean, what are you watching there right now, Eric?
For where you live, early frost is almost never talked about. But where I live in Illinois, we do get concerned about it because our normal first frost dates are normal. So the average is about mid-October. Where you are today, it's the first week of October. And if you were to keep on going toward the north and west, it can sometimes be in mid to late September. And because of how wet it was early, anything that comes in with some early cold in that area will likely hit a crop that's not finished because of the late plant or the replant. So there's a lot of growers in that area still very worried. So I'll just give you the big picture. I don't see anything coming in the next 10 days. No frost threat in the next 10 days. Even with the cool down that's coming late in the week and over the weekend, not there. But if we all of a sudden start seeing Alaska get really hot, that's going to be an indicator that we're going to drop some cold air into the Great Lakes states and it'll push in to the Midwest and give us a frost risk. But I just don't see that in the near term. But we actually need Alaska to stay cold and stormy and big low pressure systems. The more that happens, the lower our risks are going forward of having an early frost.
All right, good things to keep in mind, and we'll start tracking that with you for sure here as we move into the harvest season. What else are you watching this week, Eric? Anything globally we need to keep an eye on? I know, I believe Brazil, we could start planting soybeans here as of September 1 as they're working out of their winter time frame here, Eric.
Yeah, so the dry season's not shutting off anytime soon. So I don't expect there to be a rapid, very early plant, where they put in that first 5% from like September 1 to September 15. I don't see that because the moisture's not there yet. And I was just looking at some satellite data today, and there's a lot of wildfires going right now in Brazil. So that's part of the spring burn-off, but some of it's uncontrolled, and that just tells you how dry the dry season was. But the longer-term trend for Brazil suggests that by the time we get to the second half of September to the beginning of October, the rains are expected to return. Some of the models are predicting that, and they've been very consistent with it. And I say that that's not a good thing. If they do come in, those rains come in, they're going to get going quickly. October's the critical month for their rainfall. They'll plant fast, and the faster they plant, that takes away a window over which U.S. crops and our markets have to cover if they get that rain in early. So some of the model trends are unfavorable for the U.S. grower, but favorable for the Brazilian grower. And then in the background, you still have La Nina trying to get its act together and get going. And reminder, we still have 60 more days of a hurricane season to deal with. We do expect the beginning of September for stuff to get cranking again. So every one of the tropical systems that's formed so far this year has hit land. So we have to be aware that that's a threat this upcoming peak of the hurricane season, which is now about 20 days away from us.
Definitely. Anything else you want to add here this week, Eric, before we let you go?
I'll just say this: hot in Europe, hot in Western Russia, like very hot in Ukraine. And yet every time that happens, we don't hear much about it. And there's been some local flooding in parts of China, still not enough to move markets any certain way. It's been a baffling year, Jesse, to try to understand how the markets have responded to weather. I think they're just responding to other things, and that's what they do. And they do their thing, and they're designed that way for a reason. And Doesn't matter what I think.
It doesn't matter what I think either, but we do our best to try and put some context on it each and every day. Folks can find more details, agweather.com, ag-wx.com for all the latest weather information from Eric Snodgrass with Nutrient Ag Solutions. Eric, thanks for joining us, and we will talk to you next week.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Jesse.
Make sure to subscribe to the Market Talk YouTube channel. You can watch our latest interviews with top market analysts in the country, find bonus content, and much more. It's easy. Just go to youtube.com/@MarketTalkAg and hit the subscribe button. Or you can search for Market Talk Ag on YouTube.